So we need more of those type of conversations in our society.
Yeah. Well, look at with this whole, Trump and Biden situation. And welcome back to the Money, the Mindset, and the Mentoring podcast. Today, we have Philip Blackett on the show. And Philip, we're going to start talking about how we can figure out really like U.S. politics, how we can figure out family dynamics, and create an amazing business environment for people to work in. And what's the one thing that we find is as uniform for all of those topics is communication. Now, look, we know politics right now is a really hot topic in the United States, and that's why I'm so excited about this conversation. We've got, Biden and his whole entourage. We've got Trump and their whole entourage, and everybody in the middle. And the one thing that we've seen in this country is a lot of great divide happening. And when we see in relationships, what's the one thing that happens as soon as somebody get married, like everybody around you is convincing you to get married. You're like, great, I got married. And they're like, just kidding. Half of you are going to fail anyways. I'm like, why would you tell me that at the beginning? And so we see that. And then we see in the work environment, there's just a lot of demise that happens in the work environment, a breakdown of communications. And I think the big thing that happens around that is all about how people handle when somebody has a different opinion. So, Philip, thanks so much for joining the show. Really excited to talk about this really important strategy of how do we have really good communication? How do we disagree without being disrespectful? And just happens to be the name of your book. Let's go.
Thanks so much, Steve. Happy to be here with you.
Yeah, man. So let's talk a little bit about like what makes you qualified to have this conversation? Why should people listen? And what is the reason that we're gonna go down this path here?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. So I think a couple of things to think about for me. So my name is Philip. I am a husband, a father, a son, not the Holy Spirit though.
I was gonna say, man, like I didn't know we were gonna go there, but
I've worked for people. People have worked for me. I've been a neighbor. I've been a classmate. And I've been a friend. Now, why do I say all that? These are all the different functions or roles I've played in my life up to this point, and they all deal with relationships with people. And what I realized in my short 39 years of being here is that, to your point, Steve, communication is absolutely important for maintaining and growing relationships. And one of the things that is very concerning now that I think a lot of people can really resonate with is, how do we go about relationships when we're coming across people that we disagree with? And the challenge I have with that is that's not necessarily a new thing. People have had different points of view since the beginning of time. You're just finding out about it and you're saying to yourself, what do I say now? I don't agree with what this person says. Do I unfriend them? Do I give them the ghost treatment, the cold shoulder? Do I put them on blast in social media for what they had to say or what they posted? Or do you find a way to learn about what that person is thinking truly behind the scenes and figure out a way to navigate the disagreement? I think I'll take one of the roles for me as far as relationships. I've been married for 8 years. And if someone told me that the only way I could stay married to my wife is that I have to agree with her and she has to agree with me on everything, we wouldn't have made it past the honeymoon stage.
Yep. Let
alone the wedding planning. It's like, hey, I want this for hors d'oeuvres. No, I want this. Okay, we can't be together then.
Well, it goes to, I think there's a lot of social norms and sort of meme style statements that get said in population that becomes almost like an edict. Mm-hmm. And I think they create a lot of divisiveness in society of, I want and you want and not what we want. And one of them is, I hear this statement all the time of happy wife,
happy life,
happy life.
Mm-hmm.
And that statement in itself is a very dangerous statement because it's very polarizing towards one individual rather than polarizing to, happy relationship, happy husband and wife, mm-hmm. or happy partners, wherever you want to go with that.
Yeah.
But the idea is that, we hear all these things that drive us into ways that we think around inclusiveness that really isn't inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
and around ways that we communicate that really is not effective communication.
Right. And I think to another point too, Steve, we also live in a world now where when I was growing up, when it came to business, a oversimplified statement that kept on being like the maxim of things was sex sells, right? Mm-hmm. Now you can apply that too, but what also comes up is division sells, polarization sells, fear sells. So you have actual businesses, and I would argue industries, that for them to survive and to thrive nowadays going forward, they have to put out content in a way that gets people from one group to not like the other. Yeah. So you are basically creating a culture that is teaching us day by day with the help of social media, that is influencing us to say, hey, the way I handle disagreements is I put somebody down. Mm-hmm. The way I handle my disagreement with someone is if I'm on a dating app, I swipe left if you are of this particular belief system. Yeah. Right. And so what happens here is we're getting to a point that in all our different relationships, you're putting yourself more and more into like a bubble that is not true. It's not realistic. I can't cover you forever, Steve. Like, you're going to come across somebody you don't see eye to eye on. Okay. How do you deal with that? And I think that we just live in more of a world we've lost our way on how to go about that. Because to your point, hey, for me to be married this long, you've been married for 15 years, that's the most intimate and close of relationships. Like, you are literally like naked in front of your spouse. Like, I can't hide anything from you. Like, how are you still with me? So if that's the case, you can be with someone for that long, good or bad, ups and downs, whether you agree or disagree. What's the takeaway that we can learn as far as why these two people would still be together in spite of it, that we can apply to people that, whether or not they're husbands and wives or sons and daughters, parents and children, colleagues at work, friends, or social media connections, that sort, these relationships where you're not with somebody for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things you brought up in our preamble was the idea around building relationships, and how when you build a relationship, you're going deeper. And as you go deeper, you start to discover things. If we think of a mine shaft, as we start drilling and we're just in that topsoil, all we're going to find is worms and a little bit of gravel. As we get a little bit deeper, we might find things like copper or granite, and we get a little bit deeper, we might find aquifers. And each time we drill a little bit deeper, we're going to find and discover something that we didn't know before. Now, some of those things, as a person who is involved in a 10-year lawsuit around drilling, I can tell you, you will discover things that you don't want to find. And that's what's going to happen in a relationship. You will find things that all of a sudden, now you're going to have a point of disagreement. How do you handle that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So when you look at the idea of handling those things, the first thing we look at is the idea of that moment. It's not about the drilling. It's not about the person operating the drilling machine. It's not about the ground itself. It's about the thing that you just found. Mm-hmm. And it's the idea of separating the person from the idea itself. So let's explore that a little bit.
Yeah. So, what I talk about in my book is a 5-step framework on how do you navigate disagreements. And step one, as you're alluding to, Steve, is how do we separate the idea or belief from the identity of the believer? And why is that important? Because depending on the issue at hand, the person you talk to, you might come across something that person is so intertwined with that it essentially becomes who he or she is. Like, my whole state of existence is hinged on this one idea, mm-hmm. right? Which makes it challenging if you disagree with it. And it becomes apparent to that person that you disagree with it. Because now they may take of it as, oh, you disagree with who I am. You don't like who I am. You are criticizing me. You're hating me. And that's oftentimes what can lead somebody to be on the defensive. They can build up their wall. They can get aggressive with you. They can start calling you names. things can get ugly really quickly, to the point of saying, hey, my existence is predicated now on you no longer existing, because just your presence around me is impacting who I am. So now we've gotten to a whole another realm, a realm here. But if we just simply state, listen, it's not about you necessarily. I know you really agree with it, and this is really important to you, which I appreciate. But if we want to talk about it, the idea, we just got to keep it focused on just the idea. Like, let's try to detach ourselves from it, right? Because otherwise, it's hard to move forward on that.
There's a book called The One Thing, written by Jay Papasan, and he really talks about the idea of being able to build up a new identity of who you are. And the first thing is, you know, so a lot of times people start with motivation, and motivation is great, but usually motivation will come at a moment. It's almost like a flash of kerosene, and then it's gone. And to really start to get into developing who you become or who you want to become, you've got to get into a state of discipline. And in that state of discipline, you're going to repeatedly start to build something up. And whether it's going to the gym or a new application of a functionality at work, whatever it is, you're going to start to build into that. And through discipline and just constantly focusing on that, you're really going to create that new semblance of a pattern. And that pattern is going to be fed through willpower. Mm-hmm. Willpower is fed really through success of whatever you're doing. I mean, if you keep on telling me to do burpees every day and I'm not feeling healthier, I'm looking at in the mirror and I'm like, I'm still out of shape. What's going on here? Not realizing it's the Cheetos, not the burpees. But I'm going to start to give up. I'm going to start saying the burpees aren't working. Like I'm going to stop doing that. But if I start seeing success, I start to do that. And as I start seeing success through willpower, achieved through discipline, being fed by motivation, I start to create an identity. Mm-hmm. And then, so this is where it's really interesting. And we start thinking, if I'm having a conversation with that person around, they've just built through discipline, through willpower, through motivation, and what they might perceive as a long time investment of getting into who that identity is, of who they are. And this is where identity politics becomes very dangerous, is that they now identify themselves as one and the same with whatever their belief pattern is. Mm-hmm. And if you disagree with that, how do you decouple that?
Right. So I think how you decouple it is one of the things that comes up top of mind for me, because I was trying to put myself in the same shoes of what you're saying, Steve, where it's just like, you know, for me, I'll use myself as an example, right? The first thing, if I was going to be in identity politics, if you want to call it that, is identify first as a Christian, mm-hmm. right? That to me is the most important part of who I am, right? I follow Jesus Christ, right? Mm-hmm. Now, with that being said, I come across people on a regular basis that don't believe in what I believe. They believe in something completely different. They may think that what I believe is nonsense, mm-hmm. right? But what has to happen for me is, one, I'm already coming into the room expecting or understanding not everyone's going to think the way I think. And that's okay. In some sense, we got to help people understand that, you know, what you believe, what you think, I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying that you also should understand the real world understanding of not everyone thinks the way you think. So you shouldn't be shocked when you come across people that oppose what you think or think something different. That's part of the reason why echo chambers are so dangerous. Mm-hmm. Because when you're not exposed to ways of other people thinking differently, this is something that I learned when I was growing up, where my mom would tell me, for example, hey, Philip, even if you feel a certain way politically, you need to open yourself up to what other people are saying on the other side for two reasons. One, it honestly it tests what you're saying, if what you're saying really holds water, if it makes sense afterwards, after seeing what someone else says. But two, it reminds you that you live in the real world. And the real world is composed of people that think like you and people that don't think like you. And you got to figure out a way to be accepting of that. And you got to figure out a way to deal with that, because you can't be in a bubble for the rest of your life. And
Absolutely.
so a way to decouple is getting that sort of mindset and approach of saying, hey, this is what I believe. And I also understand I'm going to come across people that agree and also disagree. And that's okay. We can still have conversations. We can still be friends. We can still work together, even if we don't see things eye to eye on everything.
It's one beautiful thing about violent sports that I love the most. And I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and for a long time I played rugby. And one of the greatest things, if I look at rugby as a sport, one of the greatest things about rugby is you get on the field and it's maximum violence. You're going to stamp on their head. You're going to punch them in the stomach. You're going to tackle them as hard as possible, and you're going to create extreme violent moments. You're there for the purposes of winning. Once you get off the field, you go to the pub, you find that person who's right across from you, you buy them a beer, and you laugh about it. And you say, man, that time when you hit me, that was a fantastic hit. So you come off with so much respect. You in essence, are having a massive disagreement on the field. But when the disagreement is done, you're still respecting that person. And you're still saying, hey, I respect what you did. I respect the way that you fought on the field. But when we got off the field, we shook hands. And as you say in your book, you talk about we still love that individual, even though we still had that massive disagreement.
Yeah. Like, Steve, competition is not a bad thing.
Yep.
I love to be in a world where meritocracy rules the day. It's between you and me, Steve. Someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, okay? The risk of me losing shouldn't be the reason why I don't participate in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? So whether it's in business or sports like rugby or politics, you're going to have people that compete. That's not a bad thing. But what you illustrate that's so beautiful is the fact that even if you compete, you give it your all. You're like coming like violent in what you do within the guidelines of the sport. For the fact that you can still come together for a beer afterwards, laugh it off, be friends about it, and still stay in touch until the next time you compete, I think that's a missing art we have. Yep. Because people feel like it has to be mutually exclusive. But that doesn't have to be the case. You can still compete with somebody or have a different way of viewing things and yet still respect and love that person in a healthy relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, my buddy of mine had a tattoo and it said, for those who shed blood with me, I shall call you brother. And I thought that was a great tattoo because it meant that you were willing to go into deep places with that individual, a deep disagreement, which I think those are what I call like really, momentous moments, like really hard moments. But out of those hard moments, you learn the most. Yep. When I have a match of jiu-jitsu, like I went through a period where I get on the mat and I would just win. I go to tournaments, I would just win. And unfortunately, I was a white belt for way too long. And I go to tournaments and it was just like, it's not fair. And because I wasn't having that heavy competition. And so, but the moment you get on the mat and somebody takes you to those deep waters that you are seriously uncomfortable and you're really testing your limits, you become a better person out of it. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we take those moments of disagreement, it's like Hegel's dialectic. You have a thesis and an antithesis. When you have two things that are colliding of momentous thing, you get synthesis. Mm-hmm. You get something that happens. When you collide an atom, you can create, worlds, these kind of momentous thinking. And so I think the idea of having two things that are very different colliding to create something better, I think is something that people really need to dive in on.
Yeah. And I think to your point, Steve, you kept hitting on the word deep, right? Like, I don't think people want superficial connections and relationships. I think that people are more connected with those who they share something more intimate with, right? Whether it's a marriage or it's a fight on the rugby field. Yep. Right. It's being in the trenches. We talk about this stuff as far as like, in war and in business, like you were right there with me. We went through our darkest periods of time. You saw me at my worst and I'm most vulnerable. Like those relationships are much more likely to be intact for the distance than ones like, oh, Hi, Steve. Hey, I'm Philip. That's it.
That's right.
So I think what goes with that is the trade-off. If you want intimacy, if you want deepness, you don't want the tip of the iceberg type of connections and relationships, right? You understand, as you're dealing even with the mine shaft example, right? You have to dig deep over time, and you're going to come up with stuff that you didn't experience or anticipate beforehand, but you work through it one way or the other, even if you don't see eye to eye on it. But it's oftentimes when you work through those tough spots where most people would quit or want to go for something more convenient or less investing of themselves and their time and their energy and resources. That's what really gets to the heart of a long-lasting connection with somebody, a more intimate relationship.
I think husbands and wives or partners who are looking to create better intimacy have a lot to learn from a street fight. Because when you think of a street fight, the person who walks out in the street fight, who's all freaking out, yelling and screaming, and they're all heightened in emotions, and they get into that fight, and they go up against a professional trained fighter. The professional trained fighter can sit there, and they can, as long as they have good defense, they can weather the storm for maybe 30 seconds in a minute. Because most people get in a street fight, they'll last 30 seconds in a minute. They're on the ground, or they're just tired out. They're exhausted. Because that emotional hype has gotten them to a state that they'll tire out so fast. The trained fighter, oh, you're tired now? Okay, now I'm going to start.
Yeah.
Now it's my turn. Now I'm going to start to test you.
Yep.
And what the person in a relationship can learn from that is that when they get into that moment, is that leading by emotions isn't what's going to get you to win. Leading by emotions is going to get you tired. Leading by emotions is going to make you to make decisions that maybe you shouldn't have made. And it's going to get you into points where you don't want to get to. And so the idea of in a relationship, whether it's a spouse's or a business relationship, leading with emotions is not going to get you to the goal line.
It makes me think of a quote, to paraphrase. Commitment is what happens when the feeling you were in when you first decided to start goes away. Because everybody can get excited about a new goal, a new opportunity, and just like, hey, like the adrenaline rush is there, right? To your point, like I'm getting in a fight. I have no idea what I'm about to do, but I'm getting in a fight. But you make it past that minute or 3 minutes if you're in a boxing match, right? Okay, like you're going to do this again. The energy I was at before is different from what it was when I got started. And
that energy level, if you've got random acts of energy, random people doing random things produce random results. And emotional output can produce very random outcomes, where a logical baseline can get you to the goal line. If you go into that disagreement with that person you really care about, and if you start off with the idea of saying, hey, look, no matter what we say about the idea of our opinions, we're going to start off saying we both love each other.
Yep.
If it's partners, we both love each other. We're both looking for the best outcome.
Yep.
So this is what we're going to do. We're going to schedule this discussion. We're not just going to have it because of an emotional outburst. And we're going to get into that moment and say, okay, now we're going to sit down and have this conversation while we're both level heads, moving towards a goal that we both agree that we both want to get there. Right? That's where it goes to your idea of where you talk about is separating the ideas based on merits without dramatic emotional effect.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's really important.
Yeah, especially, I keep going back on your trained fighter analogy, right? It's like, if you come into it knowing, okay, if I just last the first couple minutes, I know there's something afterwards. The other person may not know of it, but it's to your advantage to know the rules of engagement, how we're going to go proceed. So it's almost like, in a sense, it's almost like why I love sales so much. If you're a really good salesperson, you know that you've been through this over and over and over again. The other person might not have. But one of your things is coming to the conversation and saying, you know what, Steve? This isn't high pressure here. I'm just trying to see if what I have to offer you is something that's helpful for you. And if it is, great. I'll share with you next steps on how you can be a part of it. If not, no big deal. I mean, at least you know more of what you're looking for, and hopefully I can point you in the right direction. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's almost like a sense like even with a disagreement, I come in there in a sense something similar. Hey, what do you agree with me or not, Steve? I still respect you, dude. Still love you, brother. We might not see eye to eye. That's fine. If you do, great. But that's not what's most important to me. What's more important to me is our relationship. And so with that being said, we can talk about it for sure. I just want to make sure you know that I still love you, man. One way or the other. And that sort of thing is very disarming for people because they're looking at it with the aggression, the adrenaline. Oh, we're about to pummel it out, either in person or online. But when you take that out the wind, I think it pleasantly surprises people. And it actually disarms them to the point where it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess we can actually just talk about it. Because part of the debate or disagreement, to your point of the thesis and the antithesis, you're exchanging information. It's an information sharing exercise. Yes, you'll evaluate which one is better, but in some sense, if there's something that's important to me, Steve, that I'm sharing with you, I look at it as I'm giving you a gift. You didn't know this about me. I volunteered. I shared it with you. You now get to know me better as a result. But what also comes with that is a responsibility, because what I'm also looking at the same time is what do you do with that gift in front of me?
With the gift of knowing you better comes the responsibility of how you handle that gift.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I
because that is going to tell me, do I share more with you? Do I open up more? Or do I close myself off? Do I build my wall up? Do I find you as somebody that I can trust with something like that, that for other people I might get criticized and made fun of? But you know what, Steve? You took the time to know more about me and the backstory on why this idea is so important to me. And I appreciate that, because I know I can't do that with other people. And that oftentimes, even if we disagree, that person's going to remember your approach in a way that said, wow, Steve's just not like everyone else.
There was a lady who called me probably about a year or two back when I was doing a mortgage and real estate deal. And she said, hey, is this Steve? I said, yes. She said, I just wanted to know, you are greedy. You are the worst person in the whole of the city. You take care of you take advantage of young women. You and she just name called for about 45 minutes, or not 45 minutes, about 45 seconds.
Okay.
She said, you're this, you're this, you're this, you're this. All these bad things she said about me. And I could have said, well, I've got a 5-star review here. I've got this. But I knew that that's not the right way to handle things. What I did is I agreed with her. I said, you know what? If I felt that somebody was greedy, if I felt that somebody took advantage of women, if I felt that somebody was only in it for themselves and only in it for the money, I would do exactly what you're doing right now, and I would call them out on it.
Mm-hmm.
I would go and I would pick up the phone, and I would have the courage that you just did to call me to have this conversation. So thank you for doing that. Whoever you're doing this for is so lucky to have somebody in their court like you. And then she went on again. She's like, oh shit, I went on an argument. And so then she went even deeper. I'm like, you're right. These are really good points to bring up. These are really important. Let's talk about these things. And let's see if they have merit. And so the idea of agreeing with somebody when they're in a heightened situation is the same thing like we talk about in a fight, is that if somebody's throwing a lot of energy at me, and especially in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you use this all the time, is you let them spend their energy. Let them get themselves into a position. Just go with it. Why fight it? Just go with it. Let them burn themselves out a little bit. Once they burn themselves out a little bit, then it's like, okay, now we can have a conversation. Cool. Mm-hmm. Perfect. And she turned into a great advocate. She realized that the number one reason why she felt that was she just didn't feel included in the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't my choice that she wasn't included. It's because her daughter was growing up, and she wasn't prepared for her daughter to grow up to be an adult and independent thinker.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a tough moment. And I know, having kids, watching our kids grow up, that it's very tough to go through those situations, that you see your kids become independent. They don't need you as much anymore, and they want to make their own mistakes. And it's hard. So as a parent, she's going through a very tough situation. And I'm with her 100% on that. Give me a couple more years, I'll be even more with her on that one as my kids get older.
Yeah.
So the idea of agreeing with them and being in a state of agreement about how they feel, because you can't change that. You can't change how somebody feels, but you can have a conversation about the idea itself.
And here's what I would say too, Steve. Clearly, you learned a lot from her over the course of that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
How much would you have learned if the moment she started reeling into you, you started going on the defensive?
Nothing. I would have learned nothing. I would have learned that I would have hung up the phone and said, that person is crazy, rather than having an amazing conversation with somebody who just truly cared about their daughter.
So we need more of those type of conversations in our society.
Yeah. Well, look at with this whole, Trump and Biden situation.
Mm-hmm.
Trump and Biden, we've got two very different, very divisive sides of the fence.
Mm-hmm.
And especially given the current shooting that happened recently, is that going to create more moments of divisiveness, or are people going to look and say, hey, how can we actually come back together and have meaningful conversations around points of governance rather than around the individuals in governing?
Here's one of the things that's been helpful for me, Steve. How old are you?
48.
So I'm 39. You're clearly older.
Ouch.
I look at it from a sense of I'm learning from you. I'm the young grasshopper, right? You're my Mr. Miyagi here, right? But with that being said, how many elections have you probably lived through?
Well, every 4 years? So you just do the math.
Every 2 to 4 years, right?
Yeah.
So the thought is once again the thesis and the antithesis, right? One party versus another party, they're gonna clash. Where do you go from this? One of the things I keep going back to the experienced fighter. If you've been through this enough times, the experienced salesperson, you've been through this enough times, you've seen this before. History tends to repeat itself within a certain degree. I've seen this movie before. I kind of sense what this election is going to be about. One side's going to think the other one is horrible. The other one's going to think that their vision for this country, this town is horrible. They're going to go about it and say, hey, people in the middle, choose our side. You don't want the other side. Okay. There was disagreements 4 years ago, and then 4 years ago before that, and then 4 years ago before that, and they'll keep going 4 years down the line. But what's helpful is helping people understand that we've been through this before. Let's figure out how to better navigate it compared to the last time we did it, though. Because I would imagine there's definitely some people with a vested interest to keep people divided, to keep people fearful, to keep people angry to the point of wanting to potentially take somebody's life. But we can choose a better way. We can choose a better way to handle disagreement, where I was friends with you before the election, Steve, and my intention is that we're going to still be friends after this election. Because I don't want a friendship that's dependent on which side of the election cycle we're on. Oh, there's another election. Okay, I'm not going to talk to Steve anymore. I'm going to
have a
unfollow
4-year hiatus, and then we'll be okay.
Right. Like that's, like I said, like what would your marriage look like if that was the case? Right? So it's helping people understand, yes, elections happen every 2 to 4 years. We got to deal with that. Yes, we're going to have difference of opinions. Okay, we're going to deal with that. But what should be more important, which is the last step of my framework, is it should be more important for us to build our relationship between you and me, Steve, rather than trying to pose who's right or who's wrong.
Yeah, and to add on that is the idea that a deeper conversation will create a deeper relationship. Deeper conversations have the consequence of finding things that we don't agree on.
Mm-hmm.
But to retain that deeper relationship is to figure out how we're going to handle that and still keep the open conversation, even though we have a diversity of opinion,
Mm-hmm.
a diversity of belief, a diversity of pattern of behavior. But we still believe that relationship is important, so we're going to keep that relationship as the ultimate focus for our activity.
I mean, I definitely will say this, Steve. Diversity goes beyond what you see on the outside. Diversity includes what people think on the inside. But if we don't have
absolutely.
an environment that honors that diversity of thought, we're going to become a much more shallow people as a result of it.
Well, if we maintain the belief that beauty is only skin deep, then we could also say the same thing about visual diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only skin deep. And I think having a deeper framework for relationships that exceed what we see, more about the relationships of how we handle things that are deeper, more impactful, and move forward that way, I think we can become greater as a society.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. My friend, so for people to get a hold of you, I would say they would go to your website, and your website is the dreambusinessmakeover.com. When they're trying to figure out how do they handle, using their business, communicating better in their business. Sometimes it's communicating with people, and sometimes it's communicating with technology. And as we start to see a convergence around the idea of relationships with people and relationship with technologies, there starts to become this almost cyborg style relationship we have with technology going forward. It's definitely something that's in the front of mind for people. So for them to find you, dreambusinessmakeover.com is the best spot to go. And I would say that's an absolute spot. The other thing to do is to look for your book. I think your book is a great book for people to look at. I loved having a discussion around disagreement or disagree without disrespect, how to have a respectful debate with those who think, believe, and vote differently from you. And that's at Amazon that people can find that as well.
Yep.
And my man, it's been so good having a chat with you, Philip, and really breaking down the idea of how to have a conversation around really things that are important. Because when it's important, people are going to get passionate about it. And to be able to get past that passion and really into the idea and come together to solve something that we can either agree to disagree or we can find something better together.
Absolutely, Steve. It's been a pleasure talking to you about this. I enjoy these type of conversations and wish many of us have more of them. So thank you for this.
Beautiful. Thank you. And guys, this is the money. This is the mindset. This is the mentoring podcast. We will see you on the next one.